Good morning, distinguished guests. On behalf of FPRC, I welcome you all to this event. Foreign Policy Dialogue is an event which has been launched by FPRC this year to discuss various aspects of India's foreign policy by those who have been associated with Indian foreign policy, either as a policy maker or as a diplomat or as a media person or as a academic. And our objective is to discuss various aspects of Indian foreign policy, the challenges faced by Indian foreign policy, and what is the way forward. This year we have chosen the main theme as India's Western Neighbourhood. It includes Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. And what are the issues and how things are happening, what are India's policy options and all that. And this session will cover all the aspects of the sub-theme. So, not saying much, and again expressing my thanks for having spared time to come to this event. I hand over the proceedings to Ambassador Shashank, who will conduct the proceedings further. Thank you.
Determined person to make sure that the foreign policy formulation, implementation remains in the mind of the policymakers as well as the young generations who are coming up and who will be making the policy in future. And that, I think, is a very important role which you are playing, because while we are all based in Delhi and sometimes are hesitant to go outside to other parts of India, but you have been taking the dialogue to all parts of the country and have been getting the scholars and young people from all parts of India to get involved in this. In fact, I would suggest that at some stage you should have a feedback program also from these states, so that those who feel that policies are too much Delhi-centric will then not feel that. They will also have a contribution to make, at least in the policy formulation. The policy may still remain the same, but the point is that the sense of participation in the formulation stages would be very important. And India, as a democratic country, as a rule-bound, with checks and balances kind of thing, but moving in a positive direction, has to create a scenario even on the foreign policy field that will be of great interest to our neighboring countries and to other countries who look at, let's say, the examples of democracies like the United States, where the party which gets 3 million extra more votes loses out. And then, let's say, the old democracy, the royalist democracy in UK, where we find that Brexit, one does not know whether the Prime Minister is in or out, and therefore we also have a contribution to make. We cannot simply say that we are getting all the policies being innovated elsewhere and brought to us by the best universities in the world, because we also have a plan to set up, once again, best universities of the world here. And we know that our neighbors, some of our neighbors whom we are going to discuss, they are changing hands. Some are realigning their military, technical, other forces. And a new scenario is emerging, which we all need to study. And I'm sure that today's deliberations will make a meaningful contribution to this series of foreign policy dialogues. One area which may not come immediately today, but we need to take care of this also when you are having an all India dialogue, that is about the people of India who go and work as engineers, doctors, teachers, engineer workers in the West Asian, our western neighborhood. And then suddenly they become destabilized, so all of them have to be evacuated. And it's not only the Indians, sometimes we have to evacuate the Pakistanis, maybe Iranians, maybe the Americans or elsewhere, other people also. So we need to develop those capabilities, but at the same time, the next stage would be that we develop the capability not to allow those regions to get destabilized. So that will be the kind of future contribution which India has to gradually keep on making. That firstly, look after your people. Secondly, to make sure that these people don't have to be looked after by emergency evacuations, but by policies which will keep those regions reasonably stable even if not totally peaceful and on the path of economic growth. So I think we need to now see issue by issue as to what is going on and how do we take into account the interests of the region, because everybody is saying that this region is very important. President Obama of the United States wanted to go for a pivot to Asia. His successor came and said, all my predecessors were doing all wrong policies, so I will now do Indo-Pacific. Very good. So we are trying to still evolve the parameters of Indo-Pacific security, economic development, and the parameters of Indo-Pacific, whether it extends up to Africa or does it mean only a little bit extension of APEC. So therefore, these are issues which will also be remain in the minds of the scholars. So I would now request, because I find that the first speaker and the first subject is of regional stability and cooperation, extremely important, and I'm so grateful to the Iran's Chargé d'Affaires and Deputy Ambassador. How do we deal with the situation which is now evolving in this region? Because there was a time when India, Iran, and Russia had worked together to stabilize Afghanistan. Now we find that the responsibility was taken over by some other countries, and once again, those countries are involving the countries of the region in this. So how does it move? Whether by stabilizing Afghanistan, we are destabilizing some other countries of the region, and how do we take care that this does not happen?
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shashank. And also I should thank Mr. Gaur for extending a warm invitation to our embassy and to us, and giving us a chance to sit with you and have the opportunity to discuss our understanding of the situation in West Asia, and also the requirements and the ways and means for bringing stability and cooperation to this strategic and important region. I should also extend my greeting to Ambassador Kanta, Ambassador Sajanha, Professor Mahapatra, and Ambassador Jha. And this is my great pleasure to meet you all in this conference room this morning. West Asia is the most important region of the world. The strategic geographical location of West Asia has made it from ancient times the center of world focus among nations and empires, as they try to control over the trade route to the east. In fact, historically, it has been an essential meeting place of the three old world continents. In addition to this factor, West Asia is geoeconomically important, especially for the emerging economies such as India and China, for its vast oil and gas resources. Unfortunately, drug trafficking and flow of refugees, together with the rise of extremism and terrorism as major sources of threat to the peace and stability of the neighboring countries, have added to the sensitivity and importance of this strategic region. However, these challenges, in spite of their costs and pains, could also be a source of cooperation and unity among the nations of this region and the nearby. Iran and the neighboring countries in this region have much in common: a shared language, deep historical and cultural bonds. Iran has always been as a warm neighbor and a protector to its neighboring nations. In fact, Iran strongly believes that the security and stability of one in this region is dependent on the others. Iran has also been an important economic partner to its West Asia neighbors. On India-Iran relations, the two countries have a common history and culture, as well as inseparable opportunities and challenges. Both shares a lot of similarities and traditions, and enjoy many common grounds and roots. Taking into account our relations and interdependence, we could work closely together to pave the way for a better understanding and make collective efforts to achieve friendship and sustainable development for all. On political relations, Iran and India for long have enjoyed friendly relations based on mutual understanding, cooperation, and respect. There is a strong and vast potential to expand these cordial ties, which derive from shared common culture and values. In fact, for many Iranians, India is the live mirror of Persian civilization. Respecting territorial integrity and avoiding interference in each other's internal affairs has always been a crucial principle for foreign policies of both states. Inquisitive literature has never had a place in the history of their relations and dialogues. The two countries share the same understanding toward many global and regional challenges and cooperate harmoniously in many international fronts. Iran supports aspirations to reform the structure of United Nations Security Council and believes that this will contribute to greater security in the international system. The two countries also believe that human rights should be respected anywhere and anytime, but not be used as a political tool to leverage pressures on independent states. The other areas of mutual interest and cooperation which the two countries share include peace and stability, in particular in Afghanistan, combating terrorism and extremism, narcotics, and human trafficking, and promoting maritime security. On economic relations, the history of trade relations shows that economies of Iran and India could significantly complement each other and accordingly add to the integrity of West Asia region. On energy security, Iran has always been one of India's major oil suppliers, which plays an important role in meeting its energy security requirements. In fact, Iran, with its abundant sources of oil and gas, is the nearest and the most available and secured source of energy to India. Its other products, such as LPG, urea, bitumen, and some other petrochemical products, are also crucial to Indian economy. Iran's natural gas exports to India through land route or deep sea pipelines, or in the form of LNG, could also be the other sphere of cooperation in the future, if the infrastructure are set in place. Further, Iran has also offered various flexibility measures and privileges, particularly in terms of prices, long-term credit, entrance, and shipping, which facilitate its bilateral oil trade with India. On the other side, India is also Iran's biggest oil customer after China, and Iran's aspiration is to maintain its presence significantly in the Indian energy market. On the issue of connectivity, which is very important and crucial for the stability in our region, Iran welcomes India's support in running a multi-purpose container terminal at Chabahar port. Developing Chabahar port on the Gulf of Oman is a major push for bringing peace and sustainable development through bigger trade with Afghanistan and Central Asia. In this respect, Iran, India, and Afghanistan could also elaborate establishing a joint shipping lane between West Indian ports and Chabahar as well. Iran's location between Persian Gulf in the south and the Caspian Sea, Russia, and Central Asian countries in the north, together with its neighborhood with Iraq and Afghanistan, could accord India tremendous transit opportunities for accessing new emerging markets. The international north-south transport corridor also facilitates transportation of goods between Central Asia and the Persian Gulf, in respect of which India has signed the Ashgabat Agreement in 2018 and is much interested to utilize this route. On trade, India plays an important role in meeting food security requirements of Iran, in particular rice, tea, corn, soya, and many other non-agricultural products. Iran sees the Indian market as a lucrative destination for exports, as well as a crucial source of investment for infrastructure and industrial projects. During last financial year, our bilateral trade reached to an amount of $13.7 billion, which we expect with the rupee mechanism to be in place, then there could be a bigger chance and opportunities for expanding our trade relations. And in conclusion, India and Iran, in their support to the central government of Afghanistan, should step up cooperation in combating extremism, terrorism, and drug trafficking in an effort to restore peace and stability in that country and the region. For Iran and India, it is important to work hard to immunize their relations from third-party influence through adoption of necessary instruments and mechanisms. Both should strive to make these relations more sustainable and durable. This requires a strong political determination, together with concluding and enforcing some trade and investment-related agreements, setting up banking relations, opening new transaction routes, and helping market and business communities, knowing each other's potentials and needs. It is our firm belief that the establishment of various friendship groups can also boost our mutual understanding and respect, and foster our relations through an even stronger engagement for the purpose of peace and stability of our region, and jointly achieving prosperity and sustainable development goals of our own people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chargé d'Affaires Masood Rahagi. I think it's an extremely important, very thoughtful, wise statement. I hope it will be included in full in your deliberations, in your future reports. And I would also request our colleagues from the media that most of the media reports come from, not from such wise statements, but from the reports which are emanating from, I don't know, deep web or wherever they emanate from. And they are picked up, and then they are circulated, recirculated. So ultimately, the very important role which the media has to play in the policy formulation on foreign policy, because we don't have many textbooks. Most textbooks are outdated as regards foreign policy, because Mr. Trump was not there 5 years ago. Mr. Obama was not there. So the textbooks are written in the pre-WTO phase, and the post-WTO now we are reaching a post-WTO era. So what happens at that time? Therefore, these statements coming from wise people and very comprehensive, but at the same time very precise, should be taken into account, because these are really for the long-term interests of the people of India and Iran and people of the region. And so I thank you very much indeed for this. Unfortunately, our next speaker had some other commitments and really inescapable, so he could not join us, Ambassador Ashok Kant. So we will have to perhaps get something from him later on. Professor Mahendra Gaur can get something in writing from him which can be put in your reports. And I would now request Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, who has very, very deep interest in the region around India, and who can cover very well the role of major powers in our region. So I request Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar to now give us his benefit of his views.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for your comments, your remarks, and also for providing me with the floor. Before I make my comments on what is the role of major powers as I see them in the region, let me also add my words of felicitation and congratulations to Professor Mahendra Gaur for getting all of us together here and having these deliberations on this very important region and on this very important subject. Along with that, I would also like to very warmly congratulate the Chargé d'Affaires, Mr. Masood Rahagi from Iran, for his very thoughtful and balanced and sober statement. I agree with all that he has said. I agree with all that Ambassador Shashank, the chair, has said while speaking about this particular statement. And I think this is really sets the stage for our discussions here. It also, of course, sets the stage for our relations that have existed for centuries between the two countries, whether it is in the area of culture, it is in the area of the civilizational links that both the countries have had, whether it is music that has come from there or the contribution that has been made in several fields of endeavor in India. So I agree, and then I don't want to repeat what has been said in the area of the importance that both the countries, India and Iran, have for each other as far as the energy needs of India are concerned, as far as the special facilities and privileges that Iran has been providing in terms of pricing, in terms of long-term credit, in terms of insurance, in terms of shipping, and all those things. So I don't want to repeat that. I don't also want to repeat what has been said about Chabahar. I don't want to repeat what has been said about the international North-South transport corridor, because I think these are fundamental aspects which guide our bilateral relations. I would just like to add maybe one or two comments, because one, of course, since it was mentioned that India is the second largest importer of oil from Iran after China, and for India, Iran is also the second largest supplier of oil. We have, I think over this last few months, our imports had gone up to anything about 700,000 barrels per day from Iran. We are about 10 to 12% of our total import requirements have been met through imports from Iran, whether it is oil. And of course, there are many other possibilities that are available in terms of export of gas from Iran to India. What has in the media, particularly I think what has been mentioned over the last several months, particularly since May of this year, is in terms of the sanctions that were imposed by the United States, in terms of the withdrawal of the United States from the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Program of Action. And as a result of that, from the 4th of this month, the fact that all countries which were importing oil were to come under sanctions. But I would just like to put, for the purposes, for the sake of record, that immediately after this announcement was made by President Trump on the 8th of May, and we had the pleasure of receiving the Iranian Foreign Minister, Mr. Javad Zarafi, in Delhi. And at that time, the External Affairs Minister had very categorically stated that India abides only by sanctions that are imposed by the United Nations, and it does not go by individual country-specific sanctions that might be imposed by any country. And this was also a position that was reiterated by the External Affairs Minister when she met her counterpart, the Iranian Foreign Minister, in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in September this year. So our position on this has been very clear, notwithstanding what has been mentioned as far as the media is concerned, that India is going to come under pressure, India is going to reduce its imports from Iran. I think the situation on the ground has not vindicated such assessments or such statements. And on the 4th of November, we also have the waiver that has been announced by the United States. But all that notwithstanding, India's imports from Iran have continued quite unabated. There are, of course, other possibilities of cooperation. There have been on the gas field, parts 2 gas field in Iran, on which I understand discussions are still going on, and maybe things will happen in the coming times. The possibilities and the potential is enormous, is huge, and I think both the countries really need to work together, as has been mentioned to ensure that the relations, bilateral relations, are immunized and are inoculated from any external threats or risks of this nature. The other two countries, let me mention also briefly, because I don't want to take too much time. It's about getting on to 11 o'clock. Our session here was supposed to be only till about 11:30, but even if we take more time, maybe we can go a little. But I'll spend about 8 to 10 minutes more on the other two countries that have been mentioned here. And the first one here is Afghanistan, and what is the role of the major powers in that particular country, because I think India's policy options will be discussed by Ambassador Jha and by Mr. Rana Banerjee. So let me try to very quickly go over what is the situation that prevails as far as Afghanistan is concerned, and some of the what is the role and interest of the major countries that in this particular country. I think 2 or 3 aspects after the fact that this global war against terrorism that was started by the United States in 2001, it's been going on for 17 years. I think a couple of things are very, very clear, and it would be useful to keep that in mind when we are discussing about the situation there. Number one, that the international community is there is a sense of fatigue as far as Afghanistan is concerned. And countries who have been involved, who have been engaged, particularly as far as the United States is concerned, as far as the NATO powers is concerned, as far as the international security forces are concerned, they would like to withdraw from there as quickly as possible. But of course, make sure that they go out with in a face-saving manner, that there is no loss of face as far as they are concerned. So United States particularly would like to make an exit from there as quickly as possible, and I think that is gels in quite well with the elections, the presidential elections that take place after 2 years in November of 2020. And we would see that this is exactly what President Barack Obama had also said, that he's going to withdraw his forces from Afghanistan before his second election. And I think this is what America is also trying to do, and that is why President Trump has appointed Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad as the chief negotiator for the United States, and he is supposed to, I think, over the time available, the very short time available to him, he is expected to sort of bring out some rabbit from the hat to produce some miracle, so that there is stability and which provides a way out for the United States to go out. Also, I think the United States has realized that the South Asia strategy that it had launched last year in August, by which it had said that there would be greater three elements. One is greater pressure on Pakistan to stop from including or interfering in Afghanistan. Number two, one was in terms of applying greater pressure on Pakistan to to ensure that it doesn't interfere in Afghanistan and also in India. Number two was putting in additional troops on the ground as far as Afghanistan is concerned. And he said that there's going to be no time limit. We are going to only move out only when there is peace is restored in Afghanistan. And of course wanting greater involvement and engagement of India in Afghanistan. Now that policy does not seem to have delivered much results, because and that brings me to the second aspect. One is the international fatigue. The second aspect is that very soon we are going to have elections in Afghanistan, presidential elections in Afghanistan, and there is a greater resurgence as far as the Taliban is concerned. Taliban is on the ascendance. The government of President Ashraf Ghani in Kabul has control only maybe about half of the country, and much of the rest is either contested or it is under the control of Taliban. Taliban has been so strong that till a few months ago, they even were able to capture Kunduz for some time, actually not once, twice, although they were beaten out from, they were thrown out from there. So number two is that Afghanistan is on the ascendance. Number three is what we have seen very recently on the 9th of this month, 9th of November, when Russia organized a meeting of all the stakeholders. There were 12 countries that were invited. Their efforts and attempts to get all these countries together earlier, and particularly a representation from the Taliban, had not succeeded. I think the only time the Taliban had come on in terms of the negotiation was about 2 or 3 years ago, when they had met with the Quad at Murree in Pakistan. But after that, the head of the Doha office, the Qatar office, Mr. Stanigzai, he was there representing the Taliban. And of course, no official representation from Afghanistan, because they thought that if it is being, the meeting is being held in another country, they should not be represented at an official level. And that was the reason why the September 4 meeting that Russia had proposed earlier, that also could not be held. And so there were official representations from all the other countries except Afghanistan and India. India has always made it a point that it should be, any peace reconciliation process has to be an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled process. And we have our policy has been quite in tandem with the Kabul government. And I think there also, if we see the manner in which Mr. Ghani had come in September 2014, when his election was held, and I'm sure people around the table here would remember that India was the 7th country that he visited, because he thought that he could invest in relations with Pakistan, with Saudi Arabia, with all the other countries. And when he visited Pakistan, he also visited Rawalpindi, the army headquarters, thinking that he will be able to get them on board in terms of both controlling Taliban and also delivering Taliban on the negotiating table. None of this has happened. So Mr. Ghani is a very disappointed person, and he can see that the influence also there is waning. So my last few words on this is that Russia is very much back in the game after having been thrown out of Afghanistan in 1989 or around that time. It's very much in the game, and I would say that it has stolen a march over the United States, because the United States has been trying to get talking with the Taliban, and they have not been able to do that. And the Taliban, of course, is made it very clear that they would not be speaking with the government in Kabul, because that is a puppet government, and they will have direct talks only with the occupiers, that is the Americans. So I think we see that Russia is actively engaged now in Afghanistan. United States has been there but wants to find a way out. China has been rather low-key in its presence in Afghanistan, but it is so far been quite prepared to give the lead to Russia. So these are baby steps that are being taken, but it appears that whatever the final outcome in Afghanistan might be, Taliban will have to be a part of the deal. Some sort of power sharing arrangement with Taliban might have to be done. So I think this, and of course, Pakistan continues to be a very important element as far as these negotiations are concerned. Finally, on the situation as far as Pakistan is concerned, I think if we look at what is the role of the major powers there, Pakistan's relations with China continue to be as strong and vibrant as ever. The visit of Prime Minister Imran Khan to China, it has, in terms of the statements emanating out of that, it was quite positive. No one could fault with anything, but two aspects I would like to refer to very quickly here. The first is that what Pakistan might have expected to get from China in terms of dealing with its financial problems, that it has not been able to get satisfaction on that. So Imran Khan has got more in terms of words, in terms of support, but very little, if at all, in terms of financial support. The second thing is that I think in Pakistan also there is an increasing realization that several elements of the China-Pakistan economic corridor might not be particularly beneficial as far as they are concerned. So whether it is on some of the railway lines, some of the other infrastructure projects, they have been trying to bring down the debt that they owe to China. But how far they'll be able to succeed, that is a moot point, because China is quite determined to take this project along. As far as relations with the United States are concerned, I have mentioned that the pressure does not seem to have paid off, because Pakistan has the support of China. And now over the last few years, and we saw that in 2016 when the Uri attack took place here in India, we had the first military exercises between Russia and Pakistan. And these exercises took place last year also. Russia is enhancing its engagement with Pakistan, it says, because I guess both because Pakistan has the potential to emerge as a large supplier of defense equipment, and its military industrial complex in Russia would want to look at any possibility of getting additional markets for that. And secondly, Russia, in strategic terms, it says that it wants the help and support of Pakistan to reach out to the Taliban, with whom it has been in contact. It has maintained contact for many years. I would say they have started coming out only recently, but it needs this contact to the Taliban to deal with the more potent danger, the more virulent danger of the Islamic State, which is coming into Afghanistan, and that could create problems, that could create instability as far as Central Asia is concerned, as far as the region is concerned, which would make Russia also very vulnerable. Now, this point of view has not really been substantiated by Afghanistan, who does not think that Islamic State, although it has a presence, it has got certain elements of the Al-Qaeda, it has got some elements of the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, of Hizb ut-Tahrir that have come and joined it, but it is still not, and it does not expect it to become a very powerful force as to be able to challenge Taliban. For Afghanistan, the government, they still see Taliban as the strongest, as the force there, terrorist force there, and that is getting all its support from Pakistan. I could really go on for a long time, but I don't think, my mandate was the role of major powers in the region. I have tried to deal with what the powers, what Russia, China, and the United States have been doing. I have not touched upon the role of China or the interest of India or the interest of India, that other colleagues are going to do it. So let me stop here and say that this region, whether it is particularly Pakistan and Afghanistan, it is in turmoil, and in the near future, I do not see anything happening which could bring stability or security or peace in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sajanar. I think very wise concluding remarks that the area would remain an area of turmoil and instability. So we have to make sure that at least those who are present here, they remain stable. And especially with Iran, we had once contributed to the stability in the region. So once again, we should make sure that when the current winds and crosswinds go away, we will continue to keep the relationship secure and steady. But let us see what will come. I have Professor Chintamani Mohapatra. He is not only the scholar from the JNU on American studies, he has also been, I remember he had briefed some of the BJP leaders, perhaps he briefed them too much also because they just followed the American line after that. So we have to now see that he does some more balancing this time in his presentation. Thank you very much.
Namaskar. Good morning. Let me at the outset thank Professor Mahendra Kaur for this opportunity. It's a very power-packed panel, and even if the audience is thin, the kind of people who are present in this room are so important that we must share our thoughts on such critical issues developing in India's western neighborhood. I'm a professor, and I look at things from a distance, in a by and large long-term perspective, unlike the diplomats. So I have absolutely no experience in handling diplomacy, but I'm a student of diplomacy. So let me make a few observations, and let me begin with the end. The way things are happening in Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan, everything else remaining the same if it continues, in the foreseeable future, I can't give a deadline, in the foreseeable future, there is the possibility of a Taliban government coming to power in Kabul with maybe a kind of broad coalition, but the dominant group in that government is going to be the Taliban. Number two, my Iranian friend will not agree with me, but still I think that in the foreseeable future, if things go the way it is going, we can see the emergence of another nuclear and missile power in the western neighborhood. And again, in Pakistan, I can visualize establishment of a new kind of Chinese colony. Although it is a nuclear weapon power, and it is a dangerous nuclear weapon power, Americans have stopped talking about Pakistan's nuclear capability. The Federation of American Scientists have come up with a report that, unlike what was predicted by them earlier, that Pakistan would have about 60 to 80 nuclear weapons by 2020. Now they say that it is already having 140 to 150 nuclear weapons, and by 2025 it is going to be 225 to 250 nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons in a country which is completely dependent on foreigners for its economic survival. A country that is rushing to IMF for loan, and its backer, which is China, is prepared to spend about $56 billion but can't give a few $1 billion to the Pakistanis, and still even the Chinese expect the IMF to do something about it. That's why I said that it may slowly turn into a Chinese colony, because the American leverage over Pakistan is reducing by the day. After spending more than $30 billion, the Americans have realized that the Pakistanis are taking American money and giving it to the Taliban and the Haqqani groups to kill the Americans in Afghanistan. So they have stopped the money. But this so-called Obor or One Belt One Road, and the Chinese determination to see that Qatar port functions very well and that roads and ports and other things are built, Pakistani, there is a growing difference between the Pakistani civil society and the Pakistani government, and the people are worried about it. You'll be surprised the reaction of the local people in Gilgit-Baltistan to this huge Chinese highway there. There are reports, you can see even on the YouTube, where the people say, we are sitting here, we're watching fantastic highways. We see the Chinese huge trucks coming and the Chinese huge trucks going, but we are getting more and more pollution and we don't know how it is going to benefit us. Similar kind of questions are being raised in Pakistan, particularly after the Sri Lankan experience in Hambantota and the Nepalese experience and the Malaysians' behavior on this. Pakistanis are worried about it. But the Pakistani government and the Pakistani military and the Chinese government are hands in glove. That is where the deals are being made and being implemented very ruthlessly, so that to protect about 2,000 to 3,000 Chinese technicians and engineers in Pakistan, more than 15,000 Pakistani soldiers are guarding them so that nobody does any harm to them. So I can see the future that if everything else remains the same, we can see the emergence of a new kind of Chinese colonialism in Pakistan. So these are the future. Let me spend a few minutes on analyzing what's happening right now. Let me begin with Afghanistan. Reports are coming up how the US government has spent more than $5 trillion and killed about 500,000 people in the so-called war on terror. Lots of money, lots of blood, 7,000 American blood included. And even then Donald Trump comes to power. Remember, let's not undermine him. During the campaign, he said, ISIS, I have a great strategy about dealing with ISIS. People laughed at him. And today, do you hear any headlines on ISIS? You don't. And unlike Obama, he has not given a timeline when to get out of Afghanistan. He has increased the number of soldiers. About 14,000 of them are in Afghanistan. But I agree with Ambassador Sajanar that deep in the hearts and back in the mind, they're planning to get out. It's rather too long. Some kind of fatigue is going on. So when the Russians were not able to have a good dialogue with the Taliban in Moscow, Khalilzad did talk to Taliban twice in last couple of months. He has been given 6 months' time by Donald Trump, come up with an idea how to resolve the issue and how to get out. Now, Taliban says, although Taliban says they would like to talk to the occupiers, their agenda is very clear. The agenda is, when do you want to get out of Afghanistan? And that is the only agenda. And if you tell us when you want to get out of Afghanistan, then we'll talk to other Afghans and try to resolve our problem. But if going by the news items, most likely he's trying his best to have some kind of dialogue between the Afghan government and the Taliban. A few years ago, the Afghan government controlled about 72% of the Afghan territory, and today 56%, 16% down. But interestingly, the chairman of the American Joint Chiefs of Staff makes a statement that Taliban is not losing the war in Afghanistan. It's a very big statement. With still some NATO forces and 14,000 Americans resident in Afghanistan saying the Taliban is not losing the war is a big statement. But the Afghan foreign minister goes to the School of Advanced International Studies in Maryland, and he makes a statement that Taliban is not winning. So what is the reality? Should we believe the American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or the Afghan foreign minister? Things are very, very complicated. Now, let me give you a few examples of our complications by linking it up with Iran. Now, maybe all of you know, but I did not know. Recently, when I read something, I don't know, you can verify, even our Iranian ambassador can also help us. Apparently, Iran is the largest commercial partner of Afghanistan. There are about 3 million Afghans living in Iran. We often in India talk about roughly about 3 million Afghans in Pakistan and all those things happening in Pakistan, but there are 3 million of them in Iran. Some of them earn money and send remittances, and that helps to some extent even the Afghan government. And when the US has imposed sanctions, if the Iranian economy is affected very negatively, the assessment is it is going to affect even the job prospect of the Afghans who are living in Iran, and in the process reduce the amount of remittances to Afghanistan, where the government is pro-American. And at the same time, it might affect even the commercial trade between the two countries that will go against the Afghan government and indirectly go against the American interest. And more interestingly, at least some Americans are saying that Pakistan is increasingly becoming unreliable. In 2011, when there was tension between the US and Pakistan, how Pakistan, closed the supply lines to Afghanistan. And then the US had to go to the Central Asian republics, and some of them are also not very reliable because they're under Russian influence and all. The only other way where supplies could be given to the Afghans is through Iran. And by following the kind of policy Trump has adopted, it is even closing that option in resolving the problem in Afghanistan. In the area where the Taliban influence is tremendous, even the drug production is increasing last year by about 40%. And interestingly, those who swear upon Allah are relying on drug money. That's the Taliban. Now, a little bit about US-Iran. There are reports that US sanctions on Iran has already begun to bite, particularly in very essential items and medicines and things like that. But quite a few analyses by the American scholars indicate that it is a very wrong policy of the Trump administration. Some of them doubt whether it would have any long-term effect. And they talk about the challenges to the very idea of sanctions as a tool of foreign policy by saying the following. Number one, the European Union is not very happy about it. They are trying their best to have some kind of European clearinghouse to help Iran buy and sell goods through the clearinghouses in European Union. That would also be an experiment where the Europeans will have economic independence from dollar. So they are trying their best. They continue to support Iran because thinking that only then Iran will abide by the JCPOA, and that is why they support it. In case of China and India and 6 other countries, the Trump administration has given a waiver. By giving the waiver, he has annoyed the Saudis, another ally with which they have a lot of differences over the murder of Mr. Khashoggi and so many other aspects. But Saudis are really angry because Saudis were told that you produce more in case there is short supply of Iranian oil, you produce more, so there is no instability in the energy market. But now the Saudis are more angry with the United States because of the waiver given to 7-8 countries, including India and all. Now, it is a very trying time for Iran. The Americans want to, they have very clear-cut goals in imposing sanctions, the Trump administration. Number one, they believe that Iran will come back and renegotiate the deal. Number two, they believe that Iran will be less capable of supporting anti-American groups in the Middle East. That includes Syria and Yemen and Iraq and all. And number three, that will again put a lot of pressure on Iran to stop firing missiles. And these are all the wish lists that you have from the Trump administration. But large number of analysis that I went through they are casting doubt on it. Iran has survived, protected itself through, of course, lots of pain, American sanctions for decades. This is a very critical time for that country, which is India's strategic partner. If Iran survives, this is my assessment, Iranians don't agree with me because I've been saying this for last several years. In fact, at one time in Jamia Millia Islamia, in the presence of half a dozen Iranian visitors, I argued that Iran had gone nuclear. They said, no, we don't believe in nuclear weapons. They said like that. The reason I'm saying the moment you are becoming capable, when you weaponize, when you don't, it is just a matter of option and time. So in that sense, I said, I did not say that they already have a few bombs and hiding in the basement. I didn't say that. But going by the American behavior towards North Korea and Pakistan, particularly, because Pakistan's nuclear program has been, in a very unwritten fashion, accepted as legitimate by the Americans. They're no longer talking about it. In case of North Korea, they can't do anything about it. But the kind of pressure Iran is facing, even after signing the JCPOA, it is a writing on the wall. So, with all due respect, the Supreme Leader is already 79 years old, and he's not well. How things are going to happen under the next regime is a big question mark that the world is watching, Indians are watching, and even Americans are watching. Finally, again as a student or maybe a teacher, let me conclude by making a few observations. Here in this meeting we're talking about 3 countries. All 3 are Islamic countries. All 3 are under American pressure. The Americans are not happy with the Pakistani government and withdrawn or suspended the assistance. The US does not believe that the Afghan government is able to do the job. 28,000 Afghan policemen and security forces have been killed, and they're not able to handle the situation so far. And in case of Iran, they're not getting along at all. So all these 3 Islamic countries in India's neighborhood, Afghanistan, of course, is a new friend of India. We've invested a lot of money there, and we truly want to build up our ties with Afghanistan despite all odds. Iran is a strategic partner of India, and Pakistan will continue to be adversarial towards India. But what happens when it becomes a Chinese colony is a thing that we should begin to think about it. Maybe I'm using a very strong word, but I mean what I say. Thank you for your attention.
Scenarios which have been developed by the professor and by the 2 diplomats so far. If Ambassador Jha kindly agrees, I would request Mr. Rana Banerjee to now speak to us on the Indian policy options, and then Ambassador Jha can add to whatever Mr. Banerjee is saying. But I can say only one thing. India has been seen and advised for its policies too long from outside. And time has come for India to take the lead now. That in case people are interested in the Indo-Pacific, people are seeing India as a strategic partner, then India's views, India's strategic interests, its partnerships with their own region need to be taken into account also. But how do we put it across? So that is also another issue which is very important, that firstly, the realization, what we have to do, secondly, how to do it, and whether the others will accept it or not. So I'm really looking forward to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And my thanks also to Professor Gaur for having given me this opportunity to speak at this forum. I shall confine myself to the options that present India in the context of the challenges which have been so provocatively put forward by previous panel speakers, particularly Dr. Mahapatra. For the integrity and sovereignty of the state, Islam being the dominant theory, jihad fi sabil illah, defense requirements primate, nuclear deterrent against India, and use of asymmetrical options, non-state actors selectively to keep India destabilized. None of this is likely to change in the near future. Yet there is, or there have been influences on the Pakistani army which have caused some introspection, if I may put it that way. A recent book by an American colonel who has over the years studied the reactions of American officers who have come and studied in the Quetta Staff College. It's called the Quetta Experience. Talks about the three levels of Pakistani officers, those at the policy direction level, those at the middle level who aspire to become policymakers, and those who don't make it. And among the second category, they feel that, you see, the experience with coping with Pakistani terror, the Pakistani terror groups which have hit inwards at the Pakistan establishment, have caused a change. So India remains enemy number one, but the terror threat also is significant. And now the Pakistan army is aware of the economic crisis that it faces. They don't want to get into the mess of extricating the economy. They'd rather leave it to the civilians and let them tamper with it till they decide to dump the last civilian and bring in a new civilian face. So that is likely to continue. And recently, if any of you would have seen Suhashini Haidar's very perceptive interview of Farzana Sheikh, a Pakistani academic based in UK, she talks about, the insecurity state. What are we against? We are against India. But what are we for? We don't know. This is the Pakistani viewpoint. So for India, what is the way out? I mean, I would believe that settlement of issues with a neighbor which can't be wished away can only be through discussion. Every country has to be effective in the region, or as a global power even, has to have a focus or priority on creating a favorable environment in the immediate neighborhood. So how can we do it? I mean, no talks, in my view, is not an option. We cannot have any complacency about any possible change or less pressure from the Pakistani establishment on the non-state actors. So therefore, we must strengthen our perimeter defenses. Defense and security installations, particularly along the line of control, international border, all over in Kashmir, we have to strengthen them to be prepared for attacks at any time. And this needs a major commitment to upscale the defenses of our installations. We must ensure respect for ceasefire along the LOC and IB, but mere retaliation without selective, thought processes can lead to collateral damage of civilians, which has counterproductive effects, as our own civilian populations in this border region, constitute a major vote bank for the party in power, both in J&K and here. So, surgical strikes, I mean, how effective have the surgical strikes been? Have they really deterred the Pakistani approach? In my view, they have not. Therefore, package which our policymakers must adopt to induce hurt but avoid collateral damage. And we should not give up completely the options of greater people-to-people contact, trade ties, selective and liberal use of visas to foster some sort of friendly opinion among the minuscule, albeit minuscule, liberal intelligentsia and common people in Pakistan who still believe that friendly ties in India could be worth it for bailing themselves out from their difficult economic situation. Also about the role of media, the second session is devoted to it. I don't find very many panelists so far of that session, but I believe that the Indian media has been making a big mistake in indulging in needless Paki bashing in the Indian media channels merely for their TP ratings. Firstly, they don't get panelists of any stature in the Pakistan civil society on their media. Even if they do, they very formidable and state-backed anchors start pejorating them and turn off even people who are friendly to India or who have a high international esteem, as recently was witnessed by the badgering of a person as eminent as Dr. Parvez Hoodboy in one of the prominent Indian channels. I mean, it is unfortunate and it is counterproductive. So I believe that the media should be more responsible, and we will have a test coming up very shortly when the two medias in the respective countries would be lined up against each other when the Kulbhushan Jadhav case comes up before the Hague International Court hearings, and that is the time I'm sure the media will run wild in both these countries. So I would suggest that the media's role should be more responsible. So much for Pakistan. In Afghanistan, as has been pointed out by previous panelists, both Ambassador Sajjanhar and Professor Chintamani Mahapath, the National Unity Government is secure, the Taliban are resilient, the USA is impatient to leave, the reconciliation process has not got anywhere. Latest deadlines in the last round of talks, Khalilzad has been confronted by the Taliban, suggesting that the postponement of the elections in April and an interim government to be formed with Dr. Abdul Sattar Sirat Tajik heading it, and none of this is going to be acceptable to Ashraf Ghani. So I don't know where this will go and how effective or successful Khalilzad would be this time. Earlier, when he was appointed, people like us who have studied, Afghanistan for long, we thought this is, honey, music and honey for us. But Khalilzad, in this incarnation, is possibly less hostile to Pakistan because of the mandate that he has been given, and the conditions on the ground also militate against his being too hostile to Pakistan. Pakistan's approach is very simple. Keep India out of Afghanistan. Any process of reconciliation, government formation, Indian influence has to be reduced. The second thing that they say is, solve Kashmir for us and everything will be all right in Afghanistan. We will do everything for you, but you sort out Kashmir for us. On both these presumptions, their, double dealings are exposed before the world, and they may not have many takers, including their, mentor, China. China is increasingly, skeptical about capacity of Pakistan to handle the Taliban completely. And there is this gnawing fear among the Pakistan military establishment also, that if they give too much of leeway to the Taliban in the reconciliation process and the power sharing formulas, they might turn inwards in a detrimental manner against Pakistan. There is the Pakistan Pashtun Tahaffuz movement that is going on, and the Pakistanis have recently said that they don't want America to leave too soon, to leave the Taliban too preponderant in Afghanistan. In overall terms, India's options therefore are to try to stall the process, hurtling towards a very grim situation. And we have to rely on our tremendous amount of goodwill that we have been able to foster through our economic and developmental focus in recent years, implementing schemes through the government of the day for building infrastructure, for offering, educational scholarships into India, medical tourism into India. All this has built up a lot of goodwill for India in Afghanistan among younger elements there. And now, with these efforts to try and keep India out, we have to counter it again in a very skillful manner, avoiding the option of any boots on the ground. That is a big no-no as far as I'm concerned. But there are other ways by which we can build up goodwill, keep contacts with our old friends and new friends among Pashtuns to ensure that we remain a player in Afghanistan. Coming to Iran, one other point on Afghanistan, there has been this issue of whether there should be contact with the Taliban. Now, the pros and cons of contacts with the Taliban have been much debated. In the past, because of our approach, believing in Afghan-led, Afghan-controlled, Afghan-owned process of negotiation or reconciliation, The Afghans are very happy with us that we haven't directly established contacts with the Taliban. After all, we should also remember the harm that they did to us, both with the hijacking of the IC-814 in Kandahar and the attacks on our consulate, albeit at Pakistani instigation, where we lost valuable diplomats and military officials. So we cannot forget these things. At the same time, and we are now under Russian pressure in this regard, we cannot hope to be completely, hands off in the efforts that are going on about getting the Taliban on board. In the past, from Doha, there have been feelers to Indian government policy making levels that we are not opposed or we are not going to be opposed to India if we come to power. So how should we respond to that? This is a dilemma, and we have to again skillfully negotiate this dilemma without letting our friends in Afghanistan feel that we are deserting them. So it will involve skillful brinkmanship in managing this relationship, and it's just as well that our government recently decided to send two very seasoned retired Afghan hands, Pakistan hands, to be present at least. But this did not satisfy our Russian friends, I'm told, who were a little unhappy with our hands-off approach. But be that as it may. I come now to Iran. The Iranian need for oil, our need for Iranian oil has been emphasized by the previous speakers, and also the issue of transit for Afghanistan. So we have to build on these two essential features. Iran, for us, has had civilizational ties, and it is our safety valve in the Islamic world. Iranians are aware that Shias in India are much better treated, are much better in a much better position than Shias in Pakistan. Also, there are problems in instigation of Sunni descent in Sistan, Balochistan from Pakistan. So all these plus the relationship with Saudi Arabia. So we have to encourage and we have to work together with Iran in building up the Chabahar Zaranj communication connectivity link, and try to assist in whatever way possible in development of the container terminal, development of the railway connection between Zahedan and Miraj and then into Zaranj, and linking this up with the circular Iranian railway system through our expertise in the rights are working in Iran, and we have to cut through the bureaucratic tape in fostering this development further. We can also build on American susceptibilities. America says that sanctions are going to affect us whatever happens, and we will be asked to reduce our oil supplies from Iran. But as against this, Ms. Alice Wells has recently said in September that we will try to see this waiver issue of how much oil we can take from Iran in the context of the impact it will have in developing the way for Chabahar route to develop and benefit Afghanistan. So we must, in our 2+2 dialogue with USA, stress on this aspect and persuade the Americans to go slow on their pressure for reducing our oil sanctions, oil intake sanctions from Iran. In the Emirates, the UAE, we have had recently very good improvement of ties because of the role of the Indian diaspora, their employment, their economic contribution in the society there. Also, the attraction of Indian markets is there, and there is an improving security relationship with the UAE administration. All of this has been to the detriment of Pakistan. And recently now you have seen Imran Khan taking a very important delegation yesterday to UAE, of course for economic aid, but he took along the army chief with him also. So we have to watch this very carefully, and hopefully we will not be badly affected by this situation. But in overall terms, of course, our options are against a very difficult and grim scenario, and I hope and wish the best for our policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Banerjee. So we need to have
Your Excellencies,
And I will also include in this our very, very learned sponsor, Mr. Gore, Professor Gore, and compliment him on the hard work he's put in every time he's had a seminar anywhere, especially today. He's got some very many people here. And I'd like to assure our friends in the academic world that we value their contributions. And Mr. Mahapatra has said many, many things today, which were, I'm sure, not fully known to most of us, many of us here. Now, I have some views on this matter, which may not tally exactly with what others have said. But nevertheless, I want to throw them out. I don't want to repeat exactly what others have said, that repetition is no good. But to say some things which are probably, maybe deliberately, may sound outlandish to some people, but doesn't matter, I will say it. Now, first and foremost, Afghanistan has always been regarded as a matter of depth for Pakistan, this military and other ventures. So they therefore resent even the slightest Indian presence or influence in that country. And the Afghan people's regard for India is certainly not something that goes on well with Pakistan, and that's putting it very mildly. They also, the Pakistani mentality, or mentality of the people in power, I'm not saying they're all Pakistanis only, they're not all, far from it. But the deep state, which is the military, really controls the setup there. If there's a recent book which Asad Durrani, who was the head of the ISI, and whom I met briefly 4 years ago in Islamabad, has written a book giving his own experiences in Pakistan. And he's clearly mentioned one point that when Benazir Bhutto, whom the army didn't like at all, was sworn in as Prime Minister in 1988, she had to come to an understanding with the army that army matters and anything related to the army, their business deals, etc., will be kept out of civilian purview. So this is as close to, or as much of an admission of what we have suspected, and people everywhere know about it. The Pakistani problem is that they also have this obsession with parity with India. And I don't know how they can achieve it, because given their, and as somebody has said in Pakistan recently, some important chap, that this is the cricketer, that let them first control the 4 provinces which constitute Pakistan before they think of Pakistan, the Kashmir. Then this, as my predecessors here in this forum have said, that they are obsessed with Kashmir, that is unfinished business of partition, so on and so forth. And even after 60 years or 70 years, they refuse to recognize a basic reality that for many years, till the Zia's regime came to power in Pakistan, Kashmir was really lying somewhere in the background. It was not being raised all the time, except as a matter pro forma by Pakistan. So we have these situations, and there are eminent Pakistanis who have said that not recently, but in the recent past, that even if Kashmir is settled, they will carry on their conflict with India, because they have, according to their judgment, matters of Bangladesh to settle with India. And how will they do it without continuing this terrorist attacks in various parts of India? And it's quite clear that they intend to carry out terrorist attacks not only in Kashmir, but in other parts of India also. And the most recent example is perhaps Amritsar 2 days ago, or a day ago. So we have all these questions now. How should we react? I personally fully support the present government standpoint, that is to say no discussion, no talks with them of any sort, until the terrorism comes to an end. And I would go one step further, that we have tried out everything in the past, over 60, 70 years. Sports contacts, people-to-people contact, a lot of literature and poetry and all the musharas and other things all the time. Now, nothing has worked. So I think we might think seriously in terms of stopping all contact with Pakistan, people-to-people, however bitter it may sound. I know that it will hurt there are many more Pakistanis visit India privately on vacation, on holiday, or to see relatives, than the other way around. Except perhaps medical, humanitarian medical cases, we cut out all the rest and see how it is, because we're not gaining anything by these contacts. On the contrary, we are having to pay a high price for it. What about the various movements for autonomy, even border secession, which are taking place in Pakistan? I would not like our friend, distinguished friend from Iran, to get worried about it, but he will recall that about 2 years ago, at a speech on the Red Fort on August 15th, Prime Minister Modi had mentioned of Balochistan by name. And if they want to play that game, so can we play that, so can we get played. And probably with equal finesse, if not greater finesse, and give them hell. So we have to keep all this in mind, because we have to shake them out of this obsession with parity with India. And even trade matters. They are members of the WTO, wherein free trade is a necessary condition for membership of the organization. We have granted them the status, MFN status, but they have not even thought of it. And they would much rather import something from a distant place, pay about 2-3 times as much as they can get from next door from India, from a port in say Kandla to Karachi, which is just a stone's throw in terms of seafaring and sea transport. So all these factors are there, and I think people, even in India, leave aside abroad, should be made more aware of these factors and what can be done, and understand our point of view. Another thing I'd like to mention also, it may sound again a bit more gravitation, some of them. Surgical strikes have been very much in demand, and also very well received on September 13, 2 years ago. But I would say that if surgical strikes have to take place in Kashmir along the LOC, then it should be a little deeper in Pakistan territory. It is a risky affair, but has to be deeper. We don't want nuclear warfare, but they should be equally scared of it. It's not that Pakistan will have an outright victory of nuclear, they drop a few bombs here and there, and they won the war. No, they will have a great difficulty. So I think this should be highlighted and into their ears, into their minds. So all this put together, we have to formulate a kind of a new policy towards Pakistan. And these are harsh options and harsh realities also, and harsh measures, and I'm normally not advocated, but I think we waited 70 years. We've done everything. The people contact, talks with them at different levels. Even the present government tried it. Where was the need? People have asked in India for Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Mr. Modi, to go all the way to Lahore on his way back from Afghanistan 2.5 years ago to felicitate Mr. Nawaz Sharif, the Prime Minister at that time, on the wedding of his granddaughter. It was a very noble gesture, very friendly gesture, just like his inviting all the SAARC ambassadors at his swearing in was also equally noble and equally friendly. But nothing came out of it. Very next day, 2 days later or a week later, the attack on Pathankot. So we see how their mind works. And on all these factors, I think we have to consider. As far as Iran and Afghanistan are concerned, Afghanistan, we are in a bit of a caught in a different position, because as my neighbor, Mr. Banerjee mentioned, or rightly put it, that the Russians would also now like us to come in and participate in talks with the Taliban. But whether we should let down our very friendly government, whether it's Karzai government or the present government in Afghanistan, and how do we proceed about it, keeping in mind that the control over the country is obviously decreasing, and Taliban seems to be on the upswing. So I would prefer to wait, as Mr. Banerjee has said, for another 6 months or so. I presume the situation will crystallize at that time before we take any new steps towards our relationship with Afghanistan. And the other matter is that Chinese, some people told me that China is about the only country which can influence Pakistan government to cut off its links with or dilute its links severely with the Taliban. I mean, as Mr. Banerjee said a minute ago, I agree with him. I'm not so sure, because they're so deeply entrenched in their linkages with the Taliban, and so much at stake for them that they would not agree to that. But if they did agree to it, it would give a tremendous boost to Chinese influence in the future of Afghanistan, whether it's the present government or the Taliban government or any government that comes into power subsequently. On Iran, may I say that the most stupid mistake that the Americans made, unpredictable as Trump is to withdraw from the agreement. It was a very sensible agreement. You know, even the IAEA, Atomic Energy Agency of Vienna, has at least twice in recent years given a report certifying that Iran is not violating the agreement or in any way indulging the preparation of nuclear weapons. But this is very, especially as Mr. Banerjee said a minute ago, that 2011 they were using Iran as a supply route to their forces in Afghanistan. In one of the notes that was sent to us on the phone, it was mentioned that Iranian influence or negative influence on Afghanistan in order to teach the Americans a lesson could also increase, because the Afghan refugees in Iran and also the stupid action that the Americans have taken vis-a-vis Iran. I think this is something the Americans might keep in mind also, apart from the fact that Iran was helpful to them in the year 2011. So we have these points here, and I think with Iran we should go ahead and develop even closer ties. Doesn't matter whether the Americans like it or not. They'll have to lump something. Even Trump has to lump many things. And on the oil thing, it was I must compliment the government of India and the Ministry of Petroleum in any case that they were able to achieve this waiver from the Americans, and also this fair amount of oil from, I think, 12 million tons a year. It's about 4-5 million tons less than we've been getting so far. And of course, there are exceptions for 6 months, and we'll see what happens after that. So may I thank everybody, the chairman and our colleagues here and the professors and Professor Gaur for organizing this meeting and for having us all here. Being the most old retired person here, naturally, I'm not preparing any notes. I must be forgiven on that. But whatever comes into my mind, whatever I am able to gather here and there, I like to mention it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. This is really great that you have put your views across very forcefully. And we know action to abide by Pakistan's views is preeminence in the region, especially on the western side. And secondly, if Pakistan keeps telling the Americans, and they more or less agree to that, though they one of these days, but we will have to deal with the Taliban in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So why can't we tell the Americans the same thing, that we will have to deal with the Afghanistan and Iran and all the other countries in the region? You may come and go. So how do we simply change all our refineries to the Saudi oil? Now, when we are not very sure whether the Saudis will really play the ball game according to your dictates, they may not. And in that case, we will be left without proper oil supply. So I would still agree with all the people that have spoken that we need to further strengthen our ties with regard to infrastructure development, to Afghanistan via Iran, and to the oil and gas supplies. I would only say that there are a lot of things which can be done despite the targeted sanctions which are being talked about by the Americans. And we should continue to do those things. I mean, apart from the hard infrastructure development, there are a lot of software kind of requirements which are there, which will take a very long time. The customs cooperation, whether the movement of goods, standardization of the tariff lines, and seeing that what happens on the along this route moves very smoothly. Because otherwise, even if we are able to complete everything else, we will find that we are still, in practical terms, still far off. And then, of course, many ideas that have been mentioned by our distinguished colleague from Iran to work out on the relationships. We need to do that. The speech of 2 years ago, which Mr. Jha reminded us on Balochistan, I mean, still remains a challenge on a long-term challenge to all the countries in the region as to what kind of peace do we want to achieve in the region by using all kinds of bombs and by having lot of manpower killed in the region, because it's no longer only Iraq and Syria and all that, they're coming much closer to us. And we have a direct responsibility to see to our own people and to our people in the region. Otherwise, how do we say that yes, India is an important power in the region, and our views should be taken into account, not just China's views. So Pakistani views we can discount, okay, that they are dictated by the hatred for the Indians. But then Chinese are a great power. They want to be #1 world power. And they have been telling India repeatedly, look, we are not against you. So please come along with us. And the Japanese and the Americans and the Australians may not be able to reach entirely your, whatever your objectives, your views are for yourself and for the region. So you have to keep in mind as to how things are going on, even in this Western region. Now we have question answer. I think I will give perhaps no observations, only questions, and I will have to request the questioner to stop if I find that it is becoming too long. So only 2 or 3 questions, no more than that, please. So 2 from this side and 2 from this side.
Okay. I have not listened to my friend Patra, who has spoken by function many times, nor other colleagues only. I listened to Mr. Rana Banerjee and Mr. and Jan, so I will actually only 2 of those questions. For Mr. Banerjee, how far can EU resist extraterritorial application of CASA? Because they have the CASA,
Okay.
American adversary, you know. And can India and China join hand to resist? Ambassador Jha, who is the senior most ambassador on Pakistan, he has said many things. He said, no talks till the terrorism ends. It's really very realistic. Will it happen in our lifetime? We will have to wait maybe eternity to the. Second, everybody knows that the ISI and army called the shots in Pakistan, known for the last 70 years. Have we not been able to develop some kind of mechanism to have access to those who really call the shots there? If army ISI calling shots, then Indian government must have some kind of connection, outreach, some channel to really influence those who make the decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Noel. I'm in 5th year law school. I just want to ask a question to Mr. Ambassador. The Indian Express carried an article a few weeks back which said that perhaps India needs to distance away from Iran and move closer to the Arab states because it has stronger stakes in the Arab states, considering the number of Indians living there, the economic interest India has. For a growing economy like India, perhaps Iran is not the best option to grow into. The second question is referring to another article in the Indian Express. It stated that after American sanctions, India's dependence on Iranian oil come down to approximately 10% of India's domestic consumption. So, do you believe that this will hurt Iranian and Indian ties, and would still be strong after the sanctions? Thank you.
I'm Mallikarjun, I'm a research scholar in JNU. So my question is on the China-Pakistan thing. And when we are looking at the economic impact of China on Pakistan, it is having just roughly $8 billion to $9 billion to import something for a couple of months. Not even couple of months. That money is sufficient only for 40 days. So how do you see if CPEC is a failure in future? Means they are not getting the economic rewards that Pakistan was expecting. So if Pakistan is not able to sustain the CPEC, where does the blame go? Will the civilian government face it, or the army takes in? And what would be the futuristic impact on the Pakistan foreign policy regarding CPEC?
Okay, so that is, there were recent reports that, first of all, Pakistan does have 9 billion only, that's true. But quite some time ago, they were quietly given 2 billion by the Chinese. But let's put that aside for the moment. 6 billion has been given to them by, I think, the newspaper reports say by Saudi Arabia. On the visit to China, there are 2 versions. One is that they got a fair amount of money, which Chinese want to keep it secret. Other is that they didn't get much, which also the Chinese want to keep it secret. Now it's your guess, which is the one that is prompting the Chinese to insist that it should be a secret. Whether they got too much or too little. It's all going by press reports. I mean, I'm not a scholar at all, but going by press reports. Thank you.
Yes, of course. To Suren's question, we will not be able to resist the pressure from CATSA for too long. So this is a one-time exception in regard to SAM 400, but increasingly the Americans can tighten screws on us. So we will have to persuade them on the oil sanction, imports issue, using the Afghanistan bait. That if you want to leave Afghanistan with the face saving, then you must let us help, develop channels for Afghanistan through Iran. And one of the ways is to improve the connectivity there. Let us work with Iran more closely, for the time being at least. So this is the line we will have to try to pursue.
I had asked whether Europe can win the race, not India.
Europe, you see, they are already, trying to help Iran, but Europe is having its own problems with USA. The Europeans are also going to face a tightening from USA, but really speaking, India should not get involved in that. That is the perspective I look at it from. Your second question regarding, channels with the army and ISI, it is not through want of trying that we haven't been able to do it. The Pakistan army decides everything about Pakistani policy. Our army cannot decide, and they don't want to talk to our army. They want to talk to our politicians, provided they can expect something from us. If we say we will not give you anything till you scrap your terror outfits, that's not going to happen, because that is their national interest. They will not give it up so easily. So it will have to be discrete channels, using baits, some economic problems where we can bail them out through negotiation, through contact, through indirect back channels. The Tariq Aziz Satilamba channel was an excellent channel. The Nasir Janjua Doval channel is not such a good one. And in any case, Nasir Janjua has quit as an NSA. They haven't appointed a new NSA. They may not. Your question regarding CPEC, how it will discredit the civilian governments there, they can. But you see, China will never give up on Pakistan. They will ultimately bail them out. And the army in Pakistan is quite sacrosanct about the Chinese support that is committed to them. The Pakistanis have not said anything about the ill treatment of Muslims in Xinjiang, despite people in Gilgit-Baltistan saying that many of our, Chinese, wives are there and they are being held in camps, etc. So this is again a problem the Pakistan army will live with. But and when Imran Khan gets discredited in due course due to his own incompetences and failures, they will dump him and go for the next civilian facade or face. So they are quite comfortably placed. China will not ditch Pakistan, though the CPEC may not completely succeed. So these are my observations.
Thank you very much indeed, Anand. So, Ambassador, would you like to say something on the Iran impact on the India-Iran thing, those sanctions fighting this? Just a little bit, if you want to say something.
Thank you very much. Certainly the sanctions, in part could affect, the relations either between Iran and India and also Iran and Afghanistan. For example, when it comes to Afghanistan, as one of our colleagues highlighted in the room, that the Afghan refugees in Iran, due to the sanctions, could be affected because there would be some difficulties for repatriation of money to their families in Afghanistan, and maybe also for their business, because even some Afghans they have invested in Iran and they are undertaking some business activities, so their business would also be affected. And when it comes to Iran and India, yes, nobody can deny that. Last year we were importing much more, and this year, as there could be some less taking of oil from Iran. Of course, the amount is not clear, and we have no information on that. This is something that bilaterally should be resolved between Iran and India. But what we can say is that Iran and India relation is not just limited to oil business. There are a wide and great scope of activities between Iran and India in terms of security cooperation, in terms of cultural relations, tourism, medical, activities and university relations. I mean, scientific activities and technological relations between Iran and India. And even in business, there are some other aspects that if oil business is not there, other aspects, could be added. And we think that we in Iran and also our Indian colleagues here, we are elaborating together that what kind of activities could be added to replace even if something happens to the oil business.
Yes, Mr. Mohanty was asked some questions.
Of the American sanctions. It is because of a variety of reasons. They may be able to arm twist India, or they may not be able to so arm twist China. They will not be able to arm twist Russia. In fact, there are people who are worried that the Russians might buy Iranian oil and sell it to the international market. And an envoy from Washington is rushing to Moscow to say that don't do this. But many things can happen. If the Americans succeed in pushing Iran beyond a point and make it zero export, it will spell disaster for world affairs. It will end the talk about China's emergence as a competitor to the United States. It will be the unipolar world order yet again. So I don't think all those things are going to happen. Secondly, as far as China-Pakistan is concerned, I agree that China is not going to abandon Pakistan. I also think that Pakistan is increasingly becoming a liability to China. So how things are going to evolve, let us watch. As I said, either Pakistan becomes a colony of China, a different kind of colony, not the traditional one, or it may so happen that Pakistan will become a failed state with lots of nuclear weapons. It's a really dangerous thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I conclude this session. Thank you very much for everyone for their views and also for the question and answer session. I think the organizer, Professor Mahendra Gaur, wants to make some important announcements. Yes, please.
I'm thankful to the panelists and the distinguished invitees for putting up such a good show of ideas, because all ideas, very thoughtful ideas. Now, very quickly, because the tea is already late, I would like to make 3 announcements. Number one, a book has been published by us on Nigeria under the project Studies on Africa, and especially High Commissioner of Nigeria is here, and he will be releasing the book with all these studies. Please bring the book.
The organizers of this conference, and I took a picture and I sent it to my friends in Nigeria. And I say, foreign policy dialogue, that I'm the only African that I can recognize that has been invited here. And I take it as a very big honor, both to Nigeria as a country and to me as a person. I am happy. I was going through this paper and seeing subjects that the Institute finds necessary, finds worthwhile to talk about. And I have one here, number 24, India-South Africa relations, and today, studies on Nigeria. Now, that says a lot, and we're grateful about it. Now, I haven't read the book, but just a few perspectives about Nigeria in summary. First and foremost, everybody knows that in terms of bilateral relations, Nigeria goes very far back with India, starting from the establishment by India of a diplomatic office in 1958. That was 2 years before Nigeria became independent. And since then, both in the non-aligned movement, in the anti-apartheid struggle, in the Commonwealth, Nigeria has been very close with India. And we're also in support of the reform of the United Nations Security Council. We recognize and welcome the leadership of the emerging power that India is, not only regionally, but globally. And we are also in support of the reform of the United Nations Security Council. We recognize and welcome the leadership of the emerging power that India is, not only regionally, but globally. And we are also in support of the reform of the United Nations Security Council. We recognize and welcome the leadership of the emerging power that India is, not only regionally, but globally. we appreciate the efforts that India has made in securing the Horn of Africa when Somalia and Co was threatened by piracy. And we noticed there's a lot of Indians all over the place. And if you look at the map of the world, you will see that the Gulf of Guinea is becoming a choke point now, and it's becoming attractive to pirates. We have a lot of defense cooperation with India, the ITEC program, and so on. So the other day, last month actually, the CII went to India. I went along with them, and the former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs gave a lecture in a policy research center in Nigeria. That's Mr. MJ Akbar. And we were talking about where defense cooperation could be boosted, seeing that we're living in a globalized world now. You know, and so we're about to have a joint commission now. And that joint commission is going to talk about quite a few things, including bilateral air services agreement, you know, and I must say here that anywhere that I go, there are questions about Chinese policy in Africa. Everywhere that I go, whether it is with FICI, whether it is with ASOCHAM, whether it is PhD and all that. And the answer that I usually give is the answer that President Yoweri Museveni gave in London. After the FOCAC ceremony that the African heads of state and government went to Beijing for, President Museveni went to London, and the BBC asked him, "Oh, what are you doing with this perceived neo-colonization of Africa?" And Museveni said, "Well, the rest of the world, the West especially, had been there. They were there since 1884-85, the Berlin Conference, and then, or the partition of Africa for more than 100 years. And then they left the vacuum, which the Chinese are filling now, but that Africa is big enough to accommodate everybody. So if anybody wakes up and wants to go back to Africa, I mean, they are welcome. We're lucky in our geographical location in Africa. We're not in West Asia like my friend, the Iranian diplomat, said. So we're not one of those. Our geographical location is we're a big continent, but we don't stand in the sea route of anybody who wants to trade. So you can develop an independent foreign policy towards Africa without coming into any kind of clash with any other country. So we also welcome the new policy of the Indian government has announced by the Minister of Foreign Affairs during the Africa Day of 25th May, which is the foundation of the Organization for African Unity, that is now the African Union, because she told us that India is opening 18 new missions in Africa now to bring the total to 47, and she said that Africa is now the #1 foreign policy priority of India. I don't know whether it's just diplomatic talk, but that is what she said. And the World Bank itself has said that Africa is the investment destination of the 21st century. So the only thing that I would say is, if you overcome the demonization of the Western media and engage with Africa, I think you will reap benefits. Finally, I think that it is the job of the intelligentsia here and the media and the press to begin to do what they can to explain the place of the African generally in a globalized world. We have to produce people that think in a globalized way instead of in an insular way, because we live in an integrated world. Thank you very much.
Research internship program. For the last 2 years, we have been having interns from all parts of India, Indian students, and they have a 3-month association with us. For 2017, Ruchi Mathur. She was the best intern. Unfortunately, she is not here. She is from GNU. For 2018, we have selected B.V. Dixit, the student of Hindu College, Delhi University, as the best intern for 2018. We would like to give a please.
Yeah, okay. Hello, sir. Just a minute.
Can you look in front?
This also, I think.
Thank you.
साहब आ रहे हैं ना?
An initiative that is honoring distinguished Indians who have been associated with the formulation, implementation, and studying and reporting of India's foreign policy. This year, we are honored to honor Ambassador N.H. Jha for FPRC Samman with a citation and a gift. And let me tell you one thing. I know him for the last 15 years. I've interviewed him for a very long time. And he, I think, celebrating the 25 years of his retirement from Indian Foreign Policy, Indian Foreign Service. So it's befitting that we honor him. And this initiative will continue, not only with the diplomats, but also with the academics and the media persons. Thank you. So this is the beginning of this initiative.